there are a number of businesses in the industry that call themselves consulting firms, but they are selling products and systems and so forth. And that goes against our grain because you can't be objective in making a recommendation to a client if you're going to make a commission or whatever on selling a certain solution, or if you have a certain group of solutions that are in your toolbox and you don't have other solutions in your toolbox. Well, what are you going to recommend? It's going to be what's in your toolbox. So we pride ourselves in being extremely objective about what we recommend to clients. For example, let's say a client wanted to improve the performance of their physical distribution center, right? So they were looking at things like layouts and equipment and automation and so forth. Sometimes the best solution economically, if you really do a business case on it, sometimes the best solution is going to be something heavily automated. Sometimes it may not be. Sometimes it may be something very manual, and it really depends on the nuances of that operation and the economics. And so we're going to recommend the best thing for that client. So sometimes that might mean recommending something. We might actually say to a client, hey, the way you're doing this today is really a good way to do it. We wouldn't recommend that you make an improvement that involves some other type of product. If we were pitching solutions, we wouldn't do that. And so to answer your question, I think clients see us as very objective. I tell clients very often, we are going to make a recommendation as if we were sitting in your CEO's chair. So what's best for your business, primarily economically, because that's usually the way these kinds of decisions are made, we're going to recommend what is going to make your business more profitable, that kind of thing. It's not going to be about some product that we sell. So the caveat that goes along with that, sometimes clients go into working with us with some preconceived notion of what they want. They might, maybe they've been to ProMat or Modex and they've seen some piece of automation or whatever, and they think, oh, wow, got to have that automation. And as we go through the process, we might lead them in a different direction because we know of a better solution. So when we kick off a relationship with a client, one of the things I like to ask them is, do you want us to tell you what you want to hear? Or do you want us to tell you what we believe is the best solution for your business based on the goals and challenges that you have shared with us? And of course, nobody says, we want you to tell us what we want to hear. But I think it helps them start to think about the fact that we're not there to necessarily to tell them what they want to hear. We want to tell them what's best for their business. And hopefully that is what they want to hear, is what's best for their business. And so that makes us a little unusual, to answer your question, in the industry. I think we tend to approach things very objectively, needs-based approach instead of a solutions-based approach.
So I understand you have some kind of diagnostic process. Does that tie into this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in any project of this type, at some point we were going to do some form of an assessment, is a term that we would use. Sometimes I use a doctor-patient analogy. If you were wanting to put yourself in the best possible health and you went to see your doctor, normally your doctor is going to do some form of a physical exam. The doctor's going to ask you questions about your health, and are you experiencing any pain? And they're also going to do some tests like, what is your cholesterol? What is your blood pressure? What is your weight? What is your height? And all these things. And by going through that process with your doctor gets a good picture of what your health is like. And then that doctor can make, hopefully, very good objective assessments and recommendations, prognoses, if that's the right word, of what you should do to make your health better. And so that process of assessing an operation is really important if we're going to go in and start suggesting changes that can be disruptive to an operation. And it's important that we understand the current health of the operation. And sometimes we start with an assessment. We do quite a few assessments every year, but we'll go in and we'll do a flyover of the entire operation and ask boatloads of questions, kind of like a physical exam, to understand where the opportunities are, what the issues are, and then make recommendations that lead them in the direction of achieving those goals and easing the pains that they're experiencing maybe on a daily basis.
Okay, that brings me to my next question. I noticed in the video on the homepage of your website that you recommend being wise about spending on warehousing, logistics, manufacturing, and distribution. And this includes reducing expenses and increasing speed and accuracy. So I'm wondering, what are some of the really big warning signs that tell a company or an operations team or even the IT department that it's time to bring in a supply chain expert, that they can't do it themselves?
Yeah, well, I mean, fundamentally, I think there's two things that tell a business that they need somebody from the outside. One is bandwidth. If they don't have resources available to tackle a challenge that they're facing, then it doesn't matter the skill set. They don't have anybody to do it anyway. So much of the work that we do, we're going into organizations that actually have very, to a certain extent, have very seasoned, knowledgeable people. They just don't have the people to carry out the projects that maybe they're going to talk to us about. But to the other part of your question is there are certainly many businesses that don't have the internal expertise, and it's not an issue of not being intelligent at all. It's really an issue more of they just haven't been exposed to certain things. And as consultants, I've been in hundreds of fulfillment centers, distribution centers, warehouses over my 37-year career now, and you get the benefit of that by somebody who's seen all kinds of different practices and processes and methods and equipment and software and everything else. Whereas sometimes people that have been with a smaller group of companies in their career, or sometimes maybe even at one company for a really long time, while they know that company's business very well, they may not have been exposed to what they could be doing. The cross-pollination is a term I use for that. So we can come in and say, hey, have you ever considered using this type of a solution or going that direction or, handling that this way or whatever it might be, whereas maybe they just haven't seen it or been exposed to it.
So would you say that the warning sign would be that they think it's time to hire, or we need to upskill people?
Well,
Is that the warning sign? Is that like, how would they know? I mean, how would they know that they don't know?
There are several warning signs to really break it down.
Give me one.
Yeah, I think if I sense that there's a few, I'll give you a few examples. One thing that sometimes we come across is there's this, they won't use these words, but boiling it down, this is really what they mean is we've always done it this way. Okay, it works. The way we do it today, it works. We get product out the door, but they don't realize how much maybe they're bleeding money in the process. They don't realize that there are better ways to do things than the way they're doing it. And if they're not open-minded enough to consider doing things better ways to reduce costs, to improve capacity, to get better accuracy or timeliness on shipments, whatever it might be, it becomes, there's not much to talk about. Similarly,
just sorry to interrupt you, but there's a good a story about the woman who cut off both ends of the turkey. Have you heard that one?
Yeah, I mean,
you heard.
That's kind of one way to look at it, sure. But another, it's almost red flag. I mean, maybe that's the term that comes to mind for what you're asking about. And if a client is penny wise and pound foolish, they're so concerned about spending money on some type of an initiative to improve an operation, yet they're like I said, bleeding money in the operation itself. I maybe I don't have a lot of patience for that. I'll give you a great example, and I can't name names of clients here, but had a client that was in the auto parts business, aftermarket auto parts, and we had analyzed their labor, and we're looking at ways that they really felt like their labor performance wasn't as where it should be, and I would agree with that. Their labor performance was poor, and we realized that implementing a labor performance improvement initiative would have remarkable payback for them. That it would cost some money, but they could implement standards and incentives and things like that, and probably, I mean, just if I had to guess, improve their labor performance order of magnitude maybe 20%. 20% additional productivity per hour out of the workers. And when we went through the analysis of this, we realized that a program like this would probably have a 6-month payback. And my team and I mean, I'll admit it, we just thought they're never going to believe this. They're going to think we're sandbagging them to 6-month payback. So we dumbed the numbers way down. We went extra conservative in the numbers and showed them like a 10-month payback on this initiative. And they said, "Oh, we can't afford that." And so when we ran the numbers, we said,
can you just to clarify for the audience, can you give me some scale, like the size of this company, like any firmographics about them, like how many employees even, or roughly?
if memory serves, we don't get too heavily into our clients' revenues and so forth, but based on size and so forth, I would guess they were a multi-billion-dollar company, but in the low multi-billions, $1 to $2 billion range, just a guess. And they had.
So when you're talking 20%, sorry about that. So when you're talking about 20% increase in productivity, that's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, they got a facility over 100 people working in this one distribution center. So I'd call it a mid-sized facility from, if you look at the spectrum of facilities. And so we were looking at the numbers and basically we said, here's what it would take to do this initiative. And it would probably take a ramping up period of 3 to 6 months to get there. But from that point, the savings they would be getting would, conservatively speaking, would pay for themselves in 6 to 12 months, let's say. And their response was, we can't afford that. And so we turned it around and said, if you can't afford that, can you afford to pay this extra 20% in labor costs annually every year from that point, from now forward? And they said, yes, because it's operating expense. And we said, what do you mean? And they said, well, we've got money to spend in the capital budget. Or I'm sorry, they said, we've got money to spend in the operating budget, the OPEX, but we don't have any money to spend in the capital expense, CapEx budget. And so we just can't spend that money. And it was a no-brainer from a numbers standpoint. But they were uncomfortable going to the CFO. I said, if you'll let us talk to the CFO and explain this, I think your CFO will understand this is a very compelling value proposition to do this. And they just didn't want to involve the CFO, a very siloed, political organization. And so that's the kind of thing. Sometimes that doesn't happen very often, but that's an example of that, where the decision making, they were their own worst enemy in terms of not being able to reach the goals because they just couldn't bring themselves to even look seriously at the things that were going to bring them serious financial benefit, but that's the way some people are, We've seen all types
of what would you say
20 years, as you might expect. I mean, you see all types of clients who kind of manage their businesses in a number of different ways.
So what would you say the main lesson that your potential clients out there could learn from this example? That they should look at the numbers, not.
I've always said this is heavily a numbers game. It is, and so when we get into the numbers, we try very hard with our clients to make sure that the numbers are valid. We're going through that with a client right now where they've given us data to analyze to help them with some planning in their facility, and we're recognizing that the numbers some of the analysis of the numbers we were working on don't flesh out. So we're questioning the original data set that they've given us, and we keep trying to tell them, look, this is a garbage in, garbage out process, and if we don't get good numbers to work with on your SKUs and your labor and all these things, then all of the analysis we end up doing to create to point to the solution is going to be invalid as well. So we've got to have good numbers to work with. But yes, it is very much a numbers game. We generally don't recommend things to clients that don't have a high economic value in terms of return on investment, that sort of thing. Now, occasionally there might be a project where somebody's interest is much more in something like capacity. Like we worked with a business that said, "Hey, we're getting ready to bust at the seams of this facility, and we don't want to move. We don't have any expansion room to expand the facility, and we don't want to build a new or move to a new facility because of the cost of doing that." And so their interest was in finding a way to get greater capacity out of their existing facility. So it wasn't so much a cost per unit processed cost as much as it was cost avoidance. And they were willing to maybe pay a little more in processing units through the facility to avoid the tens of millions of dollars they would have had to spend on a new facility to move to another facility. So sometimes, the math, if you will, the analysis has to factor in cost avoidance as well as actual direct cost of processing and storing and all that.
Okay, so it sounds to me like there are some companies out there that they don't even think about going through this process. They just suffer with it, and they just think that's just the way things work. That's the way we do it. And what are our competitors doing? They probably have the same problems. Why should we care? They're not even dialed into let's optimize our supply chain. Those are probably going to be the toughest potential clients to ever convince. But if there is someone out there who comes to the realization that we need to bring in an expert, or maybe there's someone out there who knows more than we do, what steps should someone like that go through to evaluate who they should hire, or what criteria should they use to determine who's a good consultant?
That for you, but I wanted to. You touched on it a second ago, and let me just mention this. That
okay,
the way I would look at it is if there was a way to improve the operation, would they want to know? And if your answer is no, then my second question would be, think of the implications of that answer. Because I think in the industry, and when I say the industry, I'm referring to the supply chain industry. Let's face it, warehousing, fulfillment, distribution, and logistics is mundane. Too many people look at it as boring, simple. They'll say, "Oh, warehousing, shoot, all you got to do is get product and put it on a shelf, and how hard is that?" And they just don't even understand how much opportunity there is if they do run the numbers, like I said, and look at different ways of doing things. And sometimes it can be substantial in terms of either cost savings or revenue improvement. And if you, the question of would you even want to know about ways that you could reduce costs or whatever, if people don't even want to bother to look. I mean, warehousing isn't sexy. I mean, people aren't excited about warehousing, and so it becomes kind of the Cinderella of the organization. They want to focus on what happens in their stores if they're a retailer, or if they're a manufacturer, they may want to focus on their product design and all that. But when it comes to like what's going on back in the supply chain, where it's just boxes and pallets and whatever, they kind of see all that stuff as boring and mundane. So unfortunately, that's why so many of them are losing money, or not losing money, but nowhere near as profitable as they otherwise could be. So let me answer your question now about the process. I think a lot of businesses make some of these kinds of decisions more or less on a knee-jerk basis. that either they don't consider the fact that there are specialists in industry who are um, experts, quote unquote, in warehousing science and distribution and logistics. They think this stuff's simpler, like I was just talking about. They think it's simpler than it is, and they feel like, how can I possibly go wrong with somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience that I could just hire and they'll run the operation. But again, they don't know what they don't know. They don't know how much opportunity there might be to make that improvement. And until they at least decide to investigate that, to talk to a consulting firm, somebody like ours, not necessarily ours, there's other good ones out there, but have that assessment done by a qualified consultant to see what the possibilities might be in terms of cost savings or service level improvements or whatever it might be. If you're just going to sit there and assume your operation is as good as it can be, you're missing the opportunity. The other thing to think about too is um, for them to look at somebody from the outside to come in and look at their operation, they may just busting their hump. Their people may be working long hours and weekends, and staying up at night trying to figure out how to do this stuff. And it can be dangerous for somebody like me and my team to go in and tell them, hey, you need to do this different, because they're like, what do you mean? We're busting our hump at this, and we're not stupid people. And you mean to tell us that there's a better way to do this stuff? And, blunt answer is, yeah, there's a better way to do it. I mean, and again, would you want to know if there's a better way? Wouldn't you want to explore the possibilities before you just accept the fact that I'm just going to have to work long hours and and can't get people to work for me, and the labor crisis going on, and can't find workers, and we'll just have to pay them double what we what we otherwise would need to pay them. You have to decide you want to make a change, and some people just have a hard time getting to that point that to look at what the possibilities are.
Okay, so they decided they want to make a change. Would you say that another good step they could take is to start reading some case studies on work that consultants
Sure.
have actually done,
Well,
and learn about?
there are, getting involved in organizations in the industry, CSCMP and WERC, which is really more focused on my area of fulfillment and warehousing. They are networking opportunities where they can, that cross pollination thing I talked about earlier, they can kind of see what other people are doing and talk to other people. That's really, really important. Some of the industry media that, DC velocity and modern materials handling and inbound logistics and these kinds of publications, supply chain brain and supply chain 24/7, to kind of see what's going
Start
on.
reading.
The danger, kind of going back to your earlier question, the danger though of an inexperienced person looking at some of that is that they get enamored with some of the sexy stuff. That they'll pull up an issue of one of these trade magazines, and on the cover it's talking about the robots running around at this fulfillment operation. Ooh, wow, the robots, those are cool. They
AI.
get enamored with that, which is I am absolutely in favor of using things like automation, like robots and all that. They really are, especially as time goes on, they're getting more and more good at what they do and more cost effective. But again, before they take that kind of a step, don't they want to look at the other possibilities as well? It's an extreme example, but we worked with a client that they sold products to like big box retailers like Lowe's and Home Depot and Target. Their product were shipped through to those retailers, and we looked at 22 different methods of picking, of order picking for their product. 22, and we literally looked at ranging from extremely manual to extremely automated, and throughout that spectrum, and did kind of a pro forma analysis to determine dollar for dollar, this is the best way, including looking at some of the intangibles, factors, flexibility, things like that. And dollar for dollar, this is the best alternative. Now they obviously had to pay a consultant, in our case us, to do that analysis for them. But once they did it and realized, bang for your buck, this is the way to do the picking. Now going forward, those consulting fees paid for themselves many times over, because now they're doing that process the most cost effective way possible. But if they just think, oh, I'm going to look at this magazine, it's got an article on robots, we got to have robots now because this magazine says we need robots, and without running the numbers like you were talking about, that's not the right way to go about it.
So you're saying they should look at what the business needs first, then look at what the IT department needs.
Yeah, bingo. I'm kind of a broken record in that. You may have seen other things that I've done where I say that, but I had a professor in college at Georgia Tech in the 80s. His name was John White, and was really a tremendous influence on me. He convinced me to go into this industry, but he told his students he said this: be requirements driven and not solutions driven. And what he meant by that was define your requirements first, requirements of your business in this case, and then go look for solutions that are going to satisfy those requirements the best, most cost effectively, whatever. So in other words, like to make a simple analogy, you don't start off defining the peg. I have a round peg, I want to find a round hole to put it in. No, you start by defining the hole, and the hole has to be this shape and this diameter and whatever, and then you go find the right peg for that hole. And if people would approach their supply chain operations that way, they'd find they'd get much better results out of them. So taking that time to the first step in the engineering method, if you studied engineering, is define the problem. And
I did.
take time to define the problem so that you know what the solution needs to be. You don't want to, going back to the doctor analogy, you don't want to diagnose before you see the patient, right? You got to define the problem, and then you find the solution. And the reality is, with the landscape of all these kinds of solutions that we've been talking about, from the very manual to the very automated, every client is different. I can't go into a client and just look at an operation and a knee-jerk reaction and say they need this type of a solution. Looks could be deceiving, and until, like I said before, until you run some of these numbers, you may realize that this client with that type of an operation needs this type of a solution, and this other client who may have what looks to be a similar operation, the numbers show otherwise, and it needs to be this other type of a solution. So that defining the problem, what are the requirements of the business, and then turn around and find solutions, that's going to pay big dividends if people decide to do that right.
So it sounds like this is a trap that a lot of businesses fall into.
Yeah, it is a trap.
They look at the technology and it's a trap.
And I'll admit it's a frustration for people like me, because, to give you an analogy, if somebody said, I want a new car, and then they immediately go out and start looking at Ferraris and Porsches and stuff, I'm the kind of person, I'm reeling them back in and saying, okay, tell me, what are you going to use this car for? Are you going to use this car to transport a family of 5 to soccer games and stuff? Then you don't need the Porsche 911. I mean, I don't want to break it to you, but you just don't need the Porsche 911. You need maybe a mid-sized sedan or SUV or something. But now if you tell me you want to compete in SCCA racing, in regional SCCA events and stuff, then I might say, okay, you need the Porsche, but you need to figure out what you're going to use the car for. What does the car have to do for you?
And then they get
satisfy your requirements.
And then they get locked into a lease.
I'm sorry, what?
And then they get locked into a lease, or in the case of a company, a multi-million-dollar software license.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I did an assessment one time for a 3PL. We have 3PLs. We do 3PL selection for clients when they're looking for a 3PL, but we also have clients who are 3PLs who bring us in to evaluate and help them improve the 3PL operation. And I did an assessment once. I'm not going to name the 3PL, but I sitting in their office and I found out that they have a certain WMS running their operation. I'm familiar with well over 100 different WMS solutions, at least on a high level. And I know certain WMS solutions are really good at certain things and not so great at other things. So that's why, again, there's not a one size fits all. You define the requirements of that company, that business, and then you find the right WMS for that. You don't just say, oh, Manhattan, not to pick on Manhattan, but Manhattan is the one to have. Not necessarily. There's sometimes Manhattan's great. Other times there might be a better alternative. So these guys had a WMS that I was familiar with, and I knew it didn't do certain fundamental things, blocking and tackling things that are needed in a 3PL operation. I just knew it and I said, well, that solution doesn't do activity-based costing, and it doesn't do invoicing because, you got to invoice, 3PLs invoice their clients. And they said, no, it doesn't do any of that stuff. We have to do all that stuff. Well, why did you select this WMS for your business? And then the truth came out. The CEO was friends with someone in the WMS business who convinced them to use their WMS. They didn't do requirements definition and really look at the different solutions and figure out which one was the best fit. It was a relationship, and so they ended up having that WMS, and that's what they used. And what a shame, because I mean, they really were, the 3PL was having to pay more on an hourly basis to its workers, and all of this, not doing things as efficiently as they could have if they bothered to do the process right, So it happens.
Sounds like it. Okay, well, on another note, thanks for all that information on supply chain. On another note, I also like to share some tips with my audience, which is consultants like yourself, on how they can grow their business. So could you share a business growth strategy or a tactic that you've used in the past that's worked for you?
Yeah, I for good or for bad, when I started my firm 19 years ago, I took the long-term view. I didn't look at, trying to massively grow my business in a short period of time, because I wanted to be able to deliver to my clients. And frankly, because I didn't have, hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest in things like marketing and all that. So, I'll just tell you what's worked for me, and it continues to work.
Okay.
I generally don't go pushing the business on other people. And what I mean by that is, it's rare that you'll see like an ad for Inviscid. You generally, I mean, we've never done like trade shows and placed ads in some of the trade magazines and so forth. Vast majority of our new business comes to us by referrals, or clients that have moved on to other companies that bring us into those companies. And so it's kind of, I guess there's an old expression, if you can continue doing the right thing right, everything tends to take care of itself. And I think that there's truth to that. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to be, I knew a gentleman years ago who started a consulting firm, and he over dinner one night, he was saying, he was concerned about the future of his business because, he just wasn't getting a lot of new clients. And he told me that, I asked a question, and he told me he was just kind of sitting around, in so many words, he was sitting around waiting for the phone to ring. And, that's not the way the business works. You don't sit around and wait for the phone to ring. So you have to make yourself get out there. I mentioned things like professional organizations, going to I rarely will miss the major conferences of, like, CSCMP Edge or the WERC conference. Or I was just at the Parcel Forum a few weeks ago, that kind of thing. Getting speaking opportunities, getting writing opportunities, getting a chance to talk the talk with people who have business problems, and that's where the vast majority of our new business comes from, is by either meeting somebody through something like that, or having worked with someone who knows our reputation and how we work, and they will refer us to others. So that's what for consulting work, that's what I recommend is trying to do those things and consistently do those things as the way to grow the business. But to be fair, if somebody thinks they're going to set the world on fire and grow their business 300% a year for some period of time, it's probably unrealistic to think that you're going to do that using the approach that I just described. So different
Mhm.
strokes for different
Well,
folks.
that's the gold standard. I call that the gold standard, where you can
Oh
get
yeah,
referrals and everything just works out nicely and everything lines up. And I've gotten referrals, and it's great. I call it first class introduction, because you basically skip over all the marketing, because marketing is mostly about awareness and building trust, and also positioning yourself as an expert and explaining what it is you know how to do, because a lot of people, they don't know. You're
right,
the expert. How would they know? They don't know. Right. So if you have someone who can say, look, this problem you have, I know this guy, he does this, 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 and this, and they trust your friend, and the friend trusts you, and it just skips over all the marketing. That's great.
right. Well,
The only
there's
problem with that is that it's not always predictable. That's the problem.
well, that's true. You like to be able to iron out the peaks and valleys, as the business goes over time. But
Exactly.
there's this
Yeah.
concept, and I learned this years ago before I had my own firm. The concept of third party edification, and what it is that uh, if you're trying, if there's a business and that business wants to, find customers, that business is going to be much more successful um, using third party edification. In other words, somebody else says,
Oh
"Oh,
yeah.
you want help in your in fulfillment operation improvement? These guys are the best guys to do that for you. You need to work with them." Rather than that business going out and saying, "We're the greatest at what we do. Come and work with us." I had this. My wife and I own some rental properties, investment properties, and we're looking for a new property manager. And so through our neighbor app, I posted a thing on there about that, and the way I wrote up the thing, I said, we're looking for a new property manager. If you have experience with a property manager that you recommend, or of somebody else who's really good at this, send them our way. And a lot of people responded, but a lot of people just said, "Hey, I'm a property manager. Pick me." That wasn't a third
Mm-hmm.
party edification. That was them trying to toot their own horn versus other people that said,
Mm.
"Oh, this person is an excellent property manager, and that has more value to me to go to that person because they were referred or recommended by this other person, as opposed to trying to toot their own horn and convince me to talk to them." And I think that's
Yeah, it's like how I explain it. There's basically three stages of growth in a business. The first stage is like the startup stage, and you're just trying to get some quick wins. So you're trying to really satisfy some customers and get some feedback and something you can turn into a case study, which is like a formalized, what you call third party edification. It's written down, you've quoted people, and then they can actually phone the person in the case study, and
mm-hmm.
it just doesn't get better than that. And the bigger the company, the more they want that. Once you get the growth stage, companies that they say they want to grow, but they're not even out of the startup stage yet. They don't have this proof that they've done it and can do it again. And then it's very difficult to grow. Like if you don't have case studies, or and there's many they come by many names: testimonials, social proof. It's really all the same thing. You've succeeded, you've helped someone, and now you've got the proof to show. So that most marketing, especially in B2B, it's really all based on that. So without that, you're really going to struggle.
Yeah,
And not all
absolutely.
clients want to give you a case study. I recommend, in fact, I got an ebook on this, is how to win case studies, like 12 ways to prepare your client for a case study. Like when you first start working with them, ask them, look, by the way, if we do an amazing job on this, would you mind if we came back and interviewed you about that? And do that right at the beginning. Because after you've done a great job, their rationale is, well, we paid you for that. We don't have time. They come up with all
Well,
kinds of
that's true.
excuses. You can create a case study program, and there's all kinds of,
We have
yeah.
not gone. We have not
Go
gone
ahead.
done this, but we've. There are some firms in the industry that I've been told actually bake into their contract that after they do the work for the
Oh,
client,
yeah.
they have the right to use the client as a case study. I generally don't recommend that, but I suppose
Yeah.
some people
Yeah.
feel like that's a one way of going about it. But
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that approach, but
yeah,
just there are techniques, ways to approach that to get case studies. And
sure.
if you don't have case studies, and I got a video on this too, I recommend writing case study articles, which is basically you describing what happened anonymously, like not mentioning their name. But if you have
Sure.
enough real world details about what happened, people are going to go, well,
Well,
it
because
sounds
it's
real to me. It's only
it's,
the really big companies.
it's an interesting thing though, because I would say it's much more the exception than the rule that this would not happen. Almost every consulting contract we have has non-disclosure information in there, and we
Mm.
wouldn't be at liberty to share. I mean, think of it bluntly. This company's bleeding money on their fulfillment operation. They're spending 10 to 20% more on labor than they should be, and we're going to go in and help them prove that. Do you think they want to admit to their shareholders that they were spending for many years
Nah.
10 to 20% more than they?
It's tricky.
I mean, or if there's something about a new DC design, and so they don't want the elements of that design to be known by their competition, that kind of thing. So it can be tricky to do things like press releases or case studies or whatever, unless it's a very unusual company that is willing to have their information shared. Unless, like you said, you do it anonymously and you say a major sporting goods
Well,
equipment company, or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
I had a client who was a Fortune 500 company, and they had about 1,400 clients. So they had a lot of clients. So they were asking all of them if they could do a case study, and they'd only get one now and then. And they contacted me to write. I think I wrote about 7 case studies for them, and I didn't know it at the time, but they were putting their business up for sale. So they were packaging their business. So they got me to write all these case studies for them.
Yeah, I call
Yeah,
that
and a year later, it was a fifth. What do you call it?
pump and dump. In
What
other
do you?
words, pump up your business to dump it, right? You kind of inflate it.
Well, they didn't really want to dump it. In fact, I think the president of the company became the marketing manager. It was bought by a Fortune 100 company, so they didn't really pump it and dump it. It was a great company. It still is a great company, and now it's owned by a Fortune 100 company. But they had really crappy case study articles basically on their website, and they hired me to interview their clients, and I did professional interviews. I wrote professional case studies, and it was a $50 million company. 1 year later, they sold it for 9 times its annual revenue. So they made $450 million about. So the case studies, I'm sure, helped.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
so they're powerful, yeah. And people don't think that a case study. What is it? It's an article. Give me a break. They're very hard to write too. It's not like writing a blog.
Right,
There's a
sure.
lot to it, many steps to it. But anyway,
The term I heard years ago on that was PAR, problem, action, and results. Is that maybe a term you use for that or something similar? Where basically, when you're putting together a case study or something like that, you need to make sure you follow what they call the PAR approach, PAR, where you define the problem, kind of like getting back to what we were talking about before. What was the business problem? What was the action used to address that problem? And then what were the results that they realized after they applied that action? So problem, action, results. And, whoever the folks that came up with this said, every really good case study you read is going to include that information. What was the problem? What was the action? What was the results?
that's actually a very sort of basic outline, like a more articulated case study that would be more effective would be you talk about the company, talk about their situation, talk about their goals, then talk about their challenge, and then talk about what they tried that didn't work, and then talk about their journey to find a solution and the struggle that they went through, and then talk about your solution and then how you implemented the solution, and then finally to talk about the results. And then percentages and measurable quantities are really important. And if you're going to write a title for a case study, the 2 best titles that work, one of them has some kind of percentage in it, and the other one is you mention a big name brand. If you're a big name brand and you mention the name of your company, that'll work. But if you're not a big name brand and you don't have a measurable quantity in the title, it won't really get noticed. So that's a really valuable tip, I think.
Right.
Okay, so I think we've come to the end of the podcast. We covered a lot of stuff. If a listener wants to get in touch with you to learn more about your services, can you give them your website address and the best way that they can reach you?
Sure. Well, the name of the firm is Inviscid Consulting. I know it's a funny word, but it is actually a real word, a dictionary word. We don't have time to get into all that today about why the name, but Inviscid is spelled I-N as in Nancy, V as in Victor, I, S as in Sam, C as in Charlie, I, D as in David. So INVISCID consulting.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. They would find me on LinkedIn as well, whatever's easier. And then our firm's phone number is 404-832-5326. It's a corporate phone number as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming on the show, Steve.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.